Please welcome Dana Lustig.
So, I think we should start, as we have so many filmmakers in the room. We have producers and directors and writers and some guests, and most of the people have seen the movie. I was thinking we should maybe start with Amy and tell us a little bit about why you chose to make this movie and how it came about.
Sure. Well, my producing partner, Ann Carey, got hold of the book very early, I think just before it was published in 2008. And she had started her career in the publishing space and just found it to be fascinating that this was a story of a woman who she'd heard about, but not really. She sort of had kind of only heard bits and pieces of it. And when she got a copy of the book, she just dug right in and said, this is a story that has to get made. And when she and I met in 2010, she described it to me as this idea that she had to develop this into a film about an aging, lesbian, alcoholic, mean cat lady, and she wondered if it was something that I might be interested in. And I said, for some reason, yeah, I think so. So I took it with me, and I happened to go on holiday with my family just after, and took it with me and read it in a tent in Tanzania by like one of those candlelit sort of hurricane lamps, and I got lost in this character and just thought immediately that when I got back to New York, I called Anne. I said, yeah, let's make this movie together, because there was something so incredibly interesting about a woman who had so many layers, who was so complicated and was so authentic, and it just spoke to me, as I'm sure it has to many people, as a story that needed to be told. You know, she might not have otherwise been noticed, or her story might not have been deemed important, but there was just something about her that was super special, and I certainly felt I could see pieces of me in Lee, and I think as time went on, we all started to feel there were little pieces of us in Lee. So that's how it started. And it's been a long journey, so 10 years.
Yeah, that's an average, I think, right? When you want to make real movies that have to say something.
That's right.
Yeah, and I can say that I feel a lot of me in this character, and I think all of us do. And I think I was talking to Marielle a little bit, and I felt that this movie, just like Marielle's first movie, is a coming-of-age movie, except in this one, the coming-of-age is a middle-aged woman finally finding her own voice. And that's why this movie was so touching for me, because I think we're all of us as artists are looking for our own voice, and it's so easy to lose it. So tell us a little bit about how it came about to you.
Yeah, so for me, like you said, my first movie was Diary of a Teenage Girl, and that was a movie that I spent 8 years making. And I think when you make your first movie and it's something that's a real passion project that you've worked so hard on, the thought of how to follow it up is a really scary idea. It's kind of that sophomore slump thing comes in, and you get really scared of like, how do I follow up something I loved so much with another project? And who do I want to be as a filmmaker beyond this one thing that I've made? And Ann Carey had worked on Diary of a Teenage Girl with me too, and had been an integral part of my career for many years. She was the person who originally suggested that I apply to the Sundance Labs, which was an experience that had changed my life as a filmmaker. So I trusted her a lot. So when she sent me this script, which at that point was already a script, and they had already developed for many, many years, and she told me that Melissa was potentially interested in it. And I knew Nicole Hollofcenter too, and so these were 3 women I was already respected and loved and admired, and I thought the idea of working on a project with all of these women who I respect so much, I was immediately intrigued and read the script. And I also I don't know, I loved Lee. I found her to be refreshing. I feel like we have male characters who are assholes all the time, and we find them to be the most interesting character, and with women, we never get to see women like that. And so there was something about her, I just immediately thought, yeah, we need more women like Lee. We also middle-aged women who kind of don't fit into society's norms, childless, lesbian, you know, she didn't fit into the kind of model of what we make movies about. And so I just thought there was something nicely radical to me about that. And Yeah, I relate. Thank you. It shouldn't be radical, but it felt weirdly radical. And so I loved her, and I immediately said yes. I mean, I think I said yes really, really quickly after I read the script. And then shortly thereafter, Melissa and I met to talk about, but basically, at that point, you had read it, you knew you were interested in making it, but it was sort of like we had a meeting to see if we saw Lee in the same way, to see if it was something that we had the same vision for, and immediately we were on the same page, because Melissa didn't judge Lee. There was no question of, like, is this character likable or any of those horrible things that none of us want to, those words we don't want to even utter. It was just like, what are all the things we love about Lee, and why are the ways that she's interesting? We just agreed. There was something about the fact that her intellect and her work is so much more important to her than her appearance that I loved. And just that she's genuinely the smartest person in every room, but no one gives her that credit. We just agreed, and so pretty quickly I think we were both like, oh yeah, let's make this movie. Yeah.
I think I totally said, I can't wait to make this, and then everyone's like, don't say that in the room. Play it cool, and I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure I said, this is gonna be great.
Yeah.
So I did not play it cool at all. I was like, I like you.
Well, I think that you both did an incredible job bringing Lee Israel to life, and it's incredible how, on the surface, like you said, she's unsympathetic, and you love her from the get-go. And I think I'm going to teach this movie because the first 10 minutes are just movie making 101. I mean, there's hardly any dialogue. There is so much, and I'm actually curious, coming from the groundlings, how much improvising and how much it was specific in the movie. But there are so many little details. There's hardly any dialogue, and even the sound, right? It starts with ice cubes, and then pouring and keeping the glass. And there's just so many little details, and we fall in love. I fell in love with you as this character, and I was touched. And hearing in the background, one of the only first sentences said in the movie is about how writer's block is about writers inventing an excuse to be lazy. And I don't think it is. I think that this is what the movie is about, and the subtext, and you hearing it in the background, and this is what you had to deal with. So do you want to tell us about how you became Lee Israel without any...
Well, I had a very quick reaction to Lee. I actually read it first when and there was an earlier incarnation of the movie that, movies fall apart all the time for a million different reasons. And my husband had a part, the part he ended up playing in this one, and that's how I read it. We read each other's scripts and talk about it, and I kind of came flying outside after I'd read it, and I was like, this is incredible. This is so good, and why on earth don't I know who Lee Israel is? And I was strangely disappointed with myself that I didn't know. I was like, I lived in New York during this time. I should know her. My God, was I at Julius's next to her? Did I talk too much? I probably would have annoyed her greatly. I kind of always think that. But I had a very strong reaction. I don't know if I was even to page 20, and I thought, oh, I like her so much. And then I had to stop, and I went back through the first 20 pages because I couldn't figure out why. And I thought, there's nothing tangible that makes me like her. There's no moment, there's no speech that makes me I'm starting to fall in love with her. And that to me was the most exciting thing. I said, I just simply do love her, and I find her intriguing and challenging. And I love someone I loved her that she didn't need someone else to validate who she was. She maybe wanted it, she needed it in her writing, but I think in the world we live in today, so many people look for validation. How was my vacation? You tell me. Do I seem crazy and bored standing in line for Starbucks? We need some other reflection back, and Lee didn't want it, didn't need it. I mean, I think deep down did, but how she motivated through life. She didn't want that, and I thought, that's a woman I want to know, even when she is difficult, which was often. I don't know, I respected her, and it also just made me think about, being so talented at something and being told at 52, we don't need you to do that anymore. You're now obsolete. I'm like, so as someone gets better and better and more experienced, the average thing is now you're obsolete. And I just found that whole way of thinking so insane that I thought, what would any of us do if we were pushed to that point? So I kind of rooted the more she kind of conned and grifted, I found myself rooting for her and for Jack Hawk. I was completely behind them.
Right, the friendship, of course. There's so many levels to this movie of so many storylines in a way, and it's the coming it's the growing up of Lee Israel and getting the courage to be herself, because she was. I love the line. I'm better. How do you say that?
Dorothy Parker than Dorothy
I'm
Parker.
better than Dorothy Parker than Dorothy Parker. There's lots of liners in this movie, actually. I feel, but yeah, the friendship is a big storyline.
It's such an unlikely, on paper, an unlikely friendship, but they were both so lonely. I thought how Mari was able to show it and how it came through in the script of like. And it's such a universal thing. I don't know any human that hasn't felt incredibly lonely and out of step and undervalued.
We're all lonely.
We are all. So I think everyone can feel that tether to those characters. And it's why, even though they shouldn't have been friends, they needed each other.
There's a beautiful shot right at the beginning when they split for the first time. She goes in and he's outside. And we know she knows. But it takes her a little while until she invites him to sleep on the sofa. And he never has to ask. And we're all inviting all of our friends right now to sleep on our sofas, right? With everything that's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it was even more poignant to watch it this weekend.
That's one of my favorite shots in the movie. That moment where the two of them part ways, and he said that his apartment was down that way, and then he turns away and goes the other direction, and you realize, oh, he doesn't have anywhere to go. For me, that their friendship was definitely the other than loving Lee, was the thing in the script that drew me to it. As much as the crime is like an interesting part of Lee and an interesting story, it wasn't the heart for me. It wasn't the thing I could really fully connect to. It was this portrait of an artist and what it feels like to be an artist who's underappreciated, which I think all of us have that fear that you would be 52 and somebody would say, oh, you're obsolete.
Yeah.
But also their friendship, these two people who, for very different reasons, don't have anybody. Lee has pushed everyone away in her life, and Jack is really in the midst of the AIDS crisis, and he has nobody because everybody has died. And I think that was something that I felt like for whatever reason, that was the thing that I was like, this is the heart of the story for me, and this is what I felt like our version really focused on.
So talking about that friendship, the last scene between them, I read that it was not there in the script, right? And you insisted on. So you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, no, so the script did have many incarnations, and there were incredible drafts. Jeff Witty had spent many years on the script. Nicole had rewritten his draft when she was going to direct it. It had lived in many incarnations, but weirdly, the true story, which was that Jack Hawk, spoiler alert, dies of AIDS, was not in the movie. And even the kind of context of it being in the AIDS crisis, even though it was 1991 in New York and both characters were gay, that wasn't in the script originally. It ended where the two of them saw each other and they didn't speak, and he wasn't sick, and there was just a look, and for me, it was the thing where, when I went back to the book, Lee had this story where there was, the last time she saw Jack Hawk, he was in a doctor's office, he was on crutches. They didn't speak, but she had an urge to trip him. And that little tidbit,
I love that line.
I took that tidbit and wrote this last scene between the two of them and had to give a real kind of, I just needed an emotional ending for his character and for the two of them together. Like, it needed to feel I was so invested in their friendship. I needed to feel some sense of an ending, and I felt like it was dishonest to not have the AIDS crisis be as present as it was. It was like all of Jack's actions were leading to a very inevitable end. So it was important that, thank you. Yeah, and their performances in that scene are just so spectacular. I can't watch that scene without crying. There's this moment where Richard turns and asks Lee to make him 29 in her book that she's gonna write about the two of them, and I can't even talk about it.
Perfect arc from laughter to tears and back to laughter again. It's in such a small time. And I think that one thing that's so fascinating about all the writing, you know, having been on a 10-year journey of this, whether it's Jeff and Nicole and Mari, is that the characters had such depth to them that I think that friendship came alive when you watched the chemistry between Richard and Melissa as well. That chemistry of them starting a friendship was very much in line with you know, going on this journey with Lee and Jack's friendship, and I think that has a lot to do with the writing.
That is such a good point. These two loved each other from the day they met in a way that was like every director's dream, because they showed up and like immediately got along, and Richard would show up on days he wasn't filming and take Melissa to lunch, and it was like amazing because they were truly becoming friends while we filmed this movie. And when we got to the scene where they were essentially breaking up, it was like they had to hug each other afterwards because it was so painful.
That's beautiful. Because we create families on every movie that we go, and then we have to say goodbye. But talking about that, I want to ask obviously Richard is British, and, and you're American, and the style of the education and the style of acting or rehearsing and all that. So how did that come together in terms of for you, and then for you, how to direct differently? Or?
For me, he's actually from Swaziland, but he's from Swaziland.
Oh.
The smallest country in the Southern Hemisphere. I know this because of Richard E. Grant.
Okay.
He's full of fun facts. I think we met on a Friday and knew we had to work on a Monday. And so there was quite a bit of nerves, I think on both of our parts, because we've since talked about it. And in meeting, we thought, well, boy, if we're oil and water, this is going to be tricky. And I don't think I was through the doorway before some look he gave me, I thought, oh, I like him very much. And it just kind of, I think we work in a very similar way. I think we fully commit right or wrong, and then trusted that Mari always had the helm of the ship, and she did it with complete authority and with complete lightness at the same time. Not to talk about you like you're not here.
Explain what do you, how you worked. Obviously, there was not a lot of rehearsals with him. Did the
we
two
read
of you
through it. We read
rehearse
through it that day, and again, like Mari and I had a very immediate feeling that we knew that we saw Lee and the story the same, and how we wanted to tell the story. And I think with Richard, he's so incredibly present as a person, and that certainly translates into his beautiful acting, because he is 1,000% there. If you go this way, he goes with you. If you go, there was an ease to it, and then we could do sometimes these incredibly difficult scenes that, at the end were just heartbreaking. And then when they were finished, I think we both can fall into the 7-year-old kind of, we both become very silly and can throw it away, which I think is really important sometimes when you're doing something that's rather difficult, and then we can go right back to it. So I had such an ease working with him, because he's always 1,000% there.
And even though, in an ideal world, I think all of us would have loved to rehearse a lot more before we started filming, and by nature of this business, it was impossible. So even though we didn't get to do a lot of rehearsal before our first day of filming, we did rehearse in the day, every day, in a private way, something that I really, I am an actor, I come from acting. For me, the way we begin every day, and the thing that's the most important, is that the actors know what they're doing and feel comfortable, and that we're all on the same page and we're all making the same movie. So when we start a scene, we have a private rehearsal with just usually the cinematographer, the AD, and me and the actors, so that and I usually have some version of blocking that I think will work in my head, but it's always about getting the actors on their feet, rehearsing it enough that everybody feels like they know what they're doing. And if the actors ever come to me and say, I don't want to sit here, I want to get up, I want to pace, it's like, great, do that, let's try that. And it's a very collaborative, so in many ways, even though we don't get this big chunk of rehearsal, we really carve out very special rehearsal time in the day, and it's not rehearsal time where the whole crew is standing there watching you, waiting to see where they're going to put their lights. You get to have that sacred time for mistakes where you all are in the room together and you're trying something and you're able to say, this isn't working for me, or it is, which I find if you don't take that time, if you don't carve it out, what ends up happening in a shoot day is there's no time to rehearse. There's just, you walk here, you do this, you say this. Everyone's going, okay, my lights are going to go there. Okay, I'm going to move this flag. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And if anyone of the actors or if me as a director is sitting there going, it's not working, there's no time for that. So making sure we always had that rehearsal time at the beginning of every scene. And these guys have incredible instincts and come in so fully prepared. I mean, there was never a time when we started a scene and I thought like, ooh, man, they don't know what they're doing. They come in with this full life, this full history. We've already talked through every scene, but they come in really feeling like they know where they are emotionally, and then we can just see how it can all play out in the day.
I'll give Mari, you're downplaying it quite a bit for yourself, but to give Mari complete kudos, and we've seen her do this now twice, and there's a, from a production perspective, it's really easy to sort of, we call it sort of the garbage in, garbage out, right? As a communicator, if you can't command a vision and communicate that vision to your entire team, not just the actors, and she did the same thing with the entire crew. Everyone always knew what Mari wanted and when she wanted it, and she didn't do it in a way that was always so obvious, but it really worked. She was such an excellent communicator from the very beginning of the development process through to this moment, and I think that says a lot because it was through her ability to communicate what she needed and what she wanted, she got the best out of everybody, and not just our amazing cast, but everybody on that crew.
And we shot this in 28 days, which seems crazy, and yet Richard and I have talked about it, that we never once felt rushed. Not once. It felt like we shot for 6 months, and I mean that in the best way. We never felt like we had to compromise or couldn't have that moment to kind of figure something out or just play it how we wanted, and there's no greater luxury than that, to feel like somebody's not standing there going like that. You're just allowed to do the work.
Even you were hiding.
We were actually behind. There were moments. Just say very far behind everybody, so that we're not in anybody's way. And some of the set was very small pieces. I mean, you saw some of those rooms. There were, a lot of people shoved into small rooms and some fried chicken everywhere. And it was sort of like moments where there was not room for anybody. But no, it never felt rushed, and it. I mean, like any time, you have like your little moments of, sure, is this going to happen today or not? But I just think it was kind of an amazing, from start to finish, a 10-year journey that really culminated in probably one of the best productions that I think we could have ever had.
It's really one of the best compliments I can get, that the set feels calm and that people feel like they can do their best work, because as much as that might sound like a sort of logistics thing, for me, it's the thing I care about so much, is that people actually are in this creative space where they can do their best work. And I feel like so much of my job is doing enough prep work that when we get there in the moment, magic can happen, surprises can happen. We've spent enough time on the script that we feel like we have it down perfect. It's not something we're figuring out in the moment. We know exactly how we want the scene to feel. So if there's a little idea that pops up, we know if it'll work or not. But really that all that work, all that prep work, 10 years of prep work, for me, maybe 2 years of prep work, whatever it is, leading up to that moment, is so that hopefully the actors, the crew, everybody comes in and feels supported, and like we have this perfect environment where we can do our work.
Well,
and
it's
it's
a true director, yeah. So, but if you want to tell us a little bit about the process that you do alone at home, of how you own the character and how There is a moment, for instance, when the lawyer at the end, right, and you receive the verdict, and the verdict is good because you don't go to jail, right, and he wants to touch you, he wants to, right, and you do a little, there's just something little that you do with your shoulder. It's not big. Was that scripted? Was that something that you just did in the moment because you felt, because you were Lee Israel at the moment, or you directed? How did that happen?
I just didn't want him to, I have a very protective sense over Lee, or for Lee, I guess is a better way to say it. And I just thought in that moment, I felt like this is not yours and I don't want your pity. And I didn't want him to touch me because he was not a part of it. And I just thought, she's just been her most vulnerable by saying something. And I always think of Lee as like an armadillo that immediately like goes back in her shell. And that kind of touch from someone else was just so, I think, shocking, and Lee did not want it. And she didn't even have to say anything. I always thought her strength was just kind of making people go away, not always verbally, which I've done a lot of strong female characters, and I feel really lucky for that. I've done a lot that are very verbal and outward, and they lead from the gut in a different way. And Lee just always, I found her very powerful in what she didn't say, and how to still control and manipulate people, and fail. And her defense mechanisms did not make her life easier. But yeah, that moment, I just thought she just would not have it. And I didn't know he was going to do that. It was a lovely moment that he tried to comfort her, but it was rejected.
The magic. It's the magic that happens on the set, and I think subconsciously we feel it, even if we don't recognize it. I mean, I watched the movie twice, so I saw it. But those are the kind of nuances that I think that the freedom you give your actors to be who they are.
So many people have commented on what a subtle, restrained performance Melissa gives. I think it's incredible, and I agree, deserves a huge round of applause. There are things that I'm in love with from the edit that are like a little twitch of her eye, where she has so many secrets inside of her that she's bubbling up, and yet she's a good liar. So it has to be shrouded in so many layers of armor, and it's a very subtle performance. I mean, and editing it was a joy, because each take, Melissa would give me something new, and I honestly could have edited a very differently, because part of why she's so wonderful, she's also a great filmmaker and knows what it is to make movies, and knows that sometimes you need emotional variations, because in the edit you may end up needing something different, slightly different than you thought you needed in that moment. And so she would also give options sometimes, especially in certain scenes. But either way, she's so present. She was in Lee from the top of her head to the tip of her toes, like so clearly that if her finger twitched, I knew it was for a reason. And so in that way, editing her was just a total joy, because I would fall in love with these tiny little subtle things she was doing.
I think the editor did a fantastic job. Another female, Anne McCabe.
Oh, the editor? Sorry.
The editor.
Yes,
yeah,
Anne McCabe, wonderful editor.
Great job. And I think that it shows, because just like you gave the actors the time to be who they are, she gave those moments, or together you gave the moments. It doesn't cut on the cut or on the word. There's so many moments where you're just there and the actors don't talk or don't say anything, and those are the magical moments.
Absolutely. She's really an incredible editor, and in many ways we felt like we were making an old movie, like we were making a movie from the 70s, because the style of movie that's really just about human behavior and just about quiet people we don't really make these kinds of movies, and the tone and the pacing of the movie felt like we were making sort of an older movie. And she immediately understood that. I mean, she's a very experienced editor who's been around for a long time, who used to cut on film all the time, and I think she relished getting to make a movie that felt this way, and that she related so much to Lee as well.
So if we talk about that, there is a clip that is ready to be shown, which is the first time that when you come into the store and you're caught, right? And there's a beautiful, that exactly what we talked about. There's a moment where you just stand in line. And that's the moment of the scene. It's almost more of the moment of the scene than when they actually talk about it. And I think it's the only handheld shot in the movie.
We switched to handheld for pretty much the sequence when the tension amped up and Lee knew she was getting caught. So it kind of started, there's the moment where she receives the voicemail that says, like, we need to talk. Right. And then we have this sort of overhead shot of her that's just pushing in. And then we switched to handheld mode. And we also went to handheld when she's destroying all the evidence.
Right, of course.
But we purposefully didn't go to Steadicam there or into, we were in handheld. It was a very conscious choice because the movie was very composed. It was very, very much on sticks, on dollies. We were Steadicam. We were trying to create an elegant world, but when we needed that tension in that other kind of way, you feel it.
But you feel it. It's at that moment. So shall we watch that clip?
Kylie, what seems to be the problem? You know, I've got that client who knew Noel Coward, and he said that Mr. Coward would never have been as explicit as he was regarding his orientation. It was illegal in those days, and anyway, apparently, the letter is a fake.
I'm shocked. I mean, my uncle would be appalled.
You mean your cousin?
Yes, my cousin has always been very avuncular toward me. So.
I also got a call from Los Angeles, Lee. It seems one of your letters was quite the controversy at a convention out there. I hate to say it, but your name's been put on a list.
On a list?
People are on alert. That's all. They won't buy from you anymore.
So I'm not going to say anything, but Melissa's name was on the list today of another list, the O word, which we're not going to use here in the room. But Variety this morning, right, acknowledged that potential. So
knock on wood.
Knock on wood. Amy, I wanted to talk a little bit about the material. It's so important to bring, I think, this book, because it's almost like a seminar in culture, and it brings up names of other incredible female leaders, groundbreaking thinkers, writers, philanthropists, people that did incredible things that were out there. And that's why I think it's important to watch this movie once or twice and go deep into it. And I'm sure there's somewhere where it's written, about all those characters that are mentioned there. But
yeah. I mean, the time and space that this took place in early 90s, 1991, and I think Melissa said this is when you arrived in New York, but it's also when I arrived in New York and when my partner Ann, just after my partner Ann had arrived. And so for us, there was a lot of wanting to experience New York again, and taking a lot from the story, a lot of those characters, a lot of those moments, and trying to recreate it. And Mari does a phenomenal job. If you've seen Diary of a Teenage Girl, you see this as well with really transporting people to time and space in a way that a lot of filmmakers I don't think can do. And so there were moments where we actually felt we were living in that sort of 1991 New York. The bookstores, the rawness of interactions and the time that people would spend with one another. One of the things I wanted to mention was we talked about the characters and how this has come from the development process through it, but it probably should be noted that there were more women around this production behind the scenes than probably a lot of a typical production would see. We had, our development execs, our producers were both women, our line producer, our editor, and I think that, for me, was one of the reasons why Lee's character, I mean, obviously her character is Lee, but the character as it was developed and written and performed, it was so nuanced because there were so many different women that put a little piece of themselves in every turn of this production, that by the time it got to our when we had a finished and edited film, she just felt more complicated and a little bit more nuanced and layered than I think you can see a lot of female characters. And, I've been in rooms, you've probably all been in rooms when you'll be the only woman in the room and then somebody will turn to you and say, oh, well, what would she do? And I say, well, I don't know. I don't have any way to relate to this particular character, but there were enough of us around this character that she developed in a very different way. And I think that was actually a very cool process to watch.
So can we go back to you yourself, alone in the room, reading and preparing the
Yes,
the
spill
role?
it, Melissa. Tell us your dirty secrets of how you become a character.
First, no, I have no idea how I do. All I can say is I have an immediate, probably irrational reaction to a character and a story. And I either feel exactly what I think they feel, and I know what breaks their heart, and I know what they think is funny, even if they don't say it. This is all, madness running around in my head, but I think if I don't, I've been lucky enough to play women that I have that feeling for. And I do. I get incredibly, I write sometimes, a lot of times it's, I do a lot with music. I read and I read and I read. With Leah, I read everything she wrote. I also listened. The most helpful thing was getting stories from people that actually knew Lee. And then, then there's a bit of conjuring, and you just want to do right by the people. Hair, like costume and wardrobe are important to me because I have no interest in looking like myself, which sounds stranger than I mean it to, but I think there's great freedom in I get to walk around in other people's shoes, and I think that allows you to be, braver or more vulnerable, and it's a very fantastic part of what I do. It kind of is like I'm not that, I think you get to be steadier or more empowered because I get to do it through someone else. And then it's very easy. It takes the pressure off of me. Mm-hmm. And then I just look to have like an amazing director that I know I'm going to barrel through the scene, and if it's not right, we'll discuss it. But I try to go off of pure instincts. I don't do anything specifically the same each time. I think each character really dictates. I do think a lot about defense mechanisms, and some people are overly people pleasers, and can be just as damaging as Lee made it so hard for herself because she could not stop bristling and driving people away. But I have a bit of a fascination in what drives us all, what are quirks. And I don't know any perfect women. I don't know how to play pleasant or blonde. I don't know. I'm not. I don't understand.
Excuse me. I'm sitting right here.
It's true, guys. It's true. But give me a real character like Lee that's complicated and irritating and smart and all these things that when I look at someone, it makes you kind of fall in love with them. I mean, all of my friends are nuts. They almost need a qualifier. It's like, they're actually great. Just get to know them. But it's why we love people. Right. We don't love people because they're pleasant. We love them because they'll talk too much or they'll say the wrong thing, but they'll show up at 3 o'clock when you don't feel well and help you. And it's a rarity that you get to play a woman like that. Those are the women I know. Mm-hmm. They're complicated and challenging. And so to get to dig your teeth into that, you just kind of like grab on and hopefully hold on.
Can I say something about your process, though? I think, weirdly, we talked a lot about how, part of why Lee got away with what she did was almost like she channeled these writers, right? She was such a good writer, she could almost channel Dorothy Parker. She could almost channel Noel Coward. I mean, writers, nobody can write like them. And for her, it was almost like she was channeling these people. And I feel kind of that way about you with Lee, too. Like, there was clearly a lot of process and a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion about Lee, but something would change in Melissa's entire body that was almost like you were channeling someone so different from Lee. Your energy is so different from Lee. Like, Melissa walks into a room, she's like bright, shiny, luminescent, like she has this light, joyful energy, and Lee is like rooted to the ground, like the opposite, like she has a rain cloud walking around over her. And honestly, I would see you on the weekend or something and almost not recognize you because you'd be you, and the energy was like so different from Lee. And it really was amazing to see. And I hadn't put it together in some ways that it was similar to Lee channeling these writers, like the way you channeled Lee. But I think it really did feel that way. And I think you do tend to work in a bit of an outside-in way. Like, you find your characters, every actor works so differently in terms of what's the key, what's the thing they need. Is it a voice? Is it a prop? Is it a clothing? But, I could see that for you it took finding all of the pieces together, but then your walk changed, your energy changed, your body, like the way you interacted with the world. That moment where Mark Evan Jackson reached out and touched your shoulder and you bristled, I remember when we did it, he naturally reached out, you did that once, and then afterwards you kind of said, was that all right? Did that feel, And it was like, yeah, that was exactly right for Lee. Like, you were just Lee in that moment, having the right reaction to what just came at you. And it was really amazing to behold, because every actor is so different in their process, and how they come to a character and what they need from me as a director is so different. But seeing the way you worked physically, it was really wonderful to watch.
So you're a chameleon. You change when you talk to different actor.
I changed to a degree. I'm always pretty honest. Like, I'm not that good at not being honest. So I'm always pretty straightforward. But I change how much I say to different actors. I think different people can take in direction in different ways. Some people want to have like a long discussion about the scene and the history of that scene and why that character is doing all the things they're doing, and they want to talk through everything from A to Z. And I love talking to actors like that. It's so fun for me to get into the backstory of why someone did what they did. I just worked with Chris Cooper, and he's like that, and it is a joy to sit and talk with him about, I think my character had this kind of business, and this was a moment in my life, and the whole history of how he got to this moment that we're filming. And other actors want to hear like one thing from you, one little drop in the bucket that says, I want you to think about this moment here, and that's enough. And so, if anything, I try to figure out what's going to be the most helpful for them, for their process, because I know what I'm asking of them. I know what a big deal it is to be an actor, and how hard what I'm asking them to do is.
A huge deal. It's a sacred profession, I think,
yes.
Being an actor.
And people do not understand it.
Out there. We do too, but not like actors.
Absolutely. And it's asking them to be totally bare in front of 100 people while all the pressure's on them, and to be present in the moment, and it's such a hard thing to do. And so, yeah, I think figuring out sort of what everybody needs for their particular process is a big part of my job, and figuring out how to help kind of steer and give them whatever support they would need for their own particular process.
So I think I got a sign that we have 5 minutes. We have for question and answers. We have some time, or yeah? And before I open it up, anybody wants to say something? All right, so let's go.
Hi, congrats on your success. So I just want to know what drives you. You've been very successful. So like you've at the top of your game. Like when you were getting to where you are right now, like, what's the through line that really kept you going and inspires you? Do you write every day? Do you have your rehearsal network? Like, what kind of got you to where you are when you were going through difficult times getting to where you are right now?
I just kept working. It didn't matter where, or I spent 20 years, not getting paid. I couldn't figure that part out, but I had a different play I wanted to do every week. I rented chairs, carried them up to, the third floor rehearsal studios and put on plays, and I just wanted to work, and I tried to not listen when people told me why I couldn't.
You did?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was told I can't play a neighbor, and I was like, I am a neighbor. Like, I literally am a neighbor. Like, I don't know how to tell my neighbors that I'm not the neighbor type, but I think I'm pretty neighborly, which is one of my favorites. She just can't play a neighbor, and it was like, I don't even know I think it was like a one-line thing. And I was like, I can't be a neighbor for one line. But just anytime someone, I said, well, I just didn't listen to that. I thought, I'm in the midst of doing it, so, and I think all the bombs and all the bad choices always kind of taught me so much. I mean, I've failed so many times on stage, but those are the things where you're like, okay. So it didn't matter if it was good or bad or if I was right for it. I took every part and I just kept working in, whatever capacity I could.
Hi, for Murray and Melissa. Obviously, Richard E. Grant has a great body of work that everyone knows. I just wondered if either of you had seen With Nil and I, and if that played a role in him getting into this film. Tonally different films, but maybe a tiny bit of crossover with the alcoholism and
I was a With Nil and I fan for sure, and had always loved Richard. And actually, I made the character British because the real Jack Hawk wasn't British. But there was something about that just seemed so right, and Richard just has that roguish charm, and so the answer is yes with Nell and I. There's some funny kind of connection between his characters, and that was his first movie. Did you know that?
Crazy? Yeah. First, I know a lot of people have asked, is it some kind of continuation? He was like, well, it's been 30 years. I can play two different drunks. He says it in a very funny way. But yeah, it's like I've seen everything he's done, so which probably part of my nerves upon meeting him. I thought he was going to be very proper and reserved,
not be less
and
proper.
he is not at all. Don't let that accent fool you. He's in a delightful way, but he's a troublemaker.
Hi, I'm British, so I'm here as a director to follow my career, and it's just so refreshing to see an all-female panel, so thank you AFI for that, and also to see an amazing female director on her journey. But question for Melissa, how is it working with a female as opposed to a male? And obviously the process is very different because females do work a little differently, but do you want to just chat a little bit about that, please?
It was fantastic. Hands down, it was fantastic. And I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of wonderful male directors, but they also have quite a developed feminine side. My husband, Paul Feig, Ted Melfi, they all have the capacity to listen and be collaborative. I think with Mari, what I said before really always sticks in my head. There was never a moment where you didn't feel completely guided, and the crew, you could see it, which you don't always see. The crew really felt we're all part of this. We know what the goal is. We know exactly what Mari's vision is. And working in this kind of time frame in these teeny, tiny sets, or not sets, actual, all the locations were real. You need that cohesiveness, and you need someone, and I think it is more likely to happen from a female director. You need someone to do the right thing for the movie instead of proving that they're right. And there's a big difference there, and when you get someone like Mari doing that, the world just kind of falls into place.
words, collaboration. I mean, that's what it is you can be a kind of grand collaborator, and that is not something that comes very easy for everybody.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, go ahead. Right here? But you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a question from Melissa. So, when you approach a character such as Lee, is there any difference between doing that and the way you tackle someone, say, Sean Spicer? And also...
well, I liked one of them a lot more.
Yeah.
No, you were doing them, can I just say?
Yeah.
She was doing them at the same time. So I take a little bit of credit for the Sean Spicer thing because she happened to be in New York.
We take a lot of credit.
For our movie, and she was on the plane flying to New York to do our movie when she ran into someone from SNL. Who'd you run into? I can't remember. But you ran into somebody and they said, oh, you're in New York. Oh, and it was like the spark happened, and then we would be filming during the week, and on Saturdays she'd go off and do Sean Spicer. And I remember our first week filming, Melissa was like, ooh, they're asking me to play Sean Spicer, should I do this? Oh my gosh. And we talked about it, and it was like, heck yeah. And then you ended up doing it, and it was so fun because we would show up to work every Monday morning, and everyone would be all like, rejuvenated and so stoked to talk about what had happened on Saturday night, because it was at the exact same time.
And you had our eyebrows too, right? Were they our eyebrows?
Similar eyebrows.
Similar eyebrows. I did not steal our eyebrows at that moment. I stole them later, just for clarity. Yeah, it was a weird pairing. That was really working two different sides. But there's absolutely no difference to me. I think the character is the character. Granted, that one you're trying to kind of shine the mirror and show someone in a different type of light. But in preparing, if it's comedy or drama, it doesn't change for me at all. I think if it's a straight-up comedy, I still try to find, or am at least very interested in, like, what's tragic about that person. Like, if they're so overly pleasant and happy, why? Like, what are they hiding? So I do the same thing. If someone's really so aggressive, what's behind that? So I change nothing. Maybe I'm supposed to, but I don't.
The question was would Sean Spicer and Lee Israel like each other? She would hate him.
She would devour him. And then spit him back out.
All right, so regretfully, I think we need to wrap this up. I had so many other things to talk about, and the palette, and the DP, and the music,
Trost, our
and the
beautiful
soundtrack.
cinematographer, Nate Heller, our beautiful composer. All the music was stuff Lee really loved. It all was based on Lee's collection of real music.
And there's going to be a vinyl that will come out with
the
music.
vinyl's coming out on November 20th, which maybe is today. I don't know the date. No, today's the 13th. In like a week, the vinyl is coming out, which has all of these songs and a lot of the score, too, which is really, the score was very inspired by Lee's real playlist. You put it like that. It's sort of like Lee's playlist. We got one of our producers, David Yarnell, was really friends with Lee, and he gave us a list of songs she really loved. All these female jazz singers, Blossom Dearie, Jerry Southern. So really that was the basis of our musical inspiration.
So go see the movie again in the theater and tell all your friends and buy the vinyl and so that we can all meet again and watch real movies on the big screen. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you.